She walked into her own wedding anniversary, only to be handed divorce papers in front of everyone. Her husband smiled, relieved, but she wasn't the powerless woman they thought she was. Behind her, a stranger whispered a secret that could destroy them all. A hidden fortune, a billionaire from her past, and betrayals no one saw coming. By the end of the night, everything she knew about love, loyalty, and power would change forever. Will she rise, or will the past finally catch her? Welcome back to Beyond Color Stories. I'm so glad you're here. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from today? I'd love to know. Make sure you stay with us until the very end of the story because you won't want to miss a single twist, surprise, or moment of drama. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and join our family so you never miss an amazing story. Now, let's dive in. The ballroom glowed like a living dream the moment Amelia Grace Thompson stepped through its grand arched entrance, her champagne-colored gown catching the soft wash of candlelight as though her entire being had been dipped in warm stardust. Golden chandeliers hung above like molten constellations, their light cascading over polished marble floors, long velvet drapes, and towering floral arrangements of ivory roses that perfumed the air with a sweetness that should have comforted her, but instead felt unfamiliar tonight. The orchestra played a delicate symphony that rippled through the room like silk, but even that beautiful sound carried an edge, a strange quietness beneath it, as if the notes were trying to mask a tension the guests could no longer hide. The moment Amelia stepped forward, her heels clicking elegantly, conversations sputtered out mid-sentence, replaced by hurried glances exchanged behind jeweled masks of polite smiles. It was supposed to be her night, the night celebrating 5 years of marriage, 5 years of love she had poured her entire soul into. Yet the air felt colder than anything she had ever known inside this mansion she had tried so hard to make a home. Her dress shimmered with every step, its soft fabric flowing behind her like a gentle whisper, and her hair, styled into soft waves, framed her radiant face. But even her beauty couldn't thaw the iciness greeting her from all sides. She noticed the first sharp sting of unease when a pair of women in sparkling diamonds abruptly lowered their voices and turned away as she approached. Then another guest offered her a smile too tight, eyes too nervous, as if he pitied her, and the flicker in his expression made her heart twist with confusion. She tried brushing it off, telling herself she was tired, overthinking or imagining shadows that weren't real. But with every new whisper, every eye that slid away from hers, every subtle stiffening of the crowd as she passed, the dread inside her grew, thick and heavy, wrapping around her ribcage like invisible vines. Daniel's mother stood near the center of the ballroom, her posture regal in a deep jade gown that sparkled under the golden lights. Her expression, however, glimmered with something far less beautiful. She looked at Amelia the way one might look at a nuisance rather than a daughter-in-law, a smirk tugging at her painted lips, not with affection, not even with pretend civility, but with unmistakable satisfaction, as if she had been waiting for this night not to celebrate, but to savor. That smirk sent an ache crawling up Amelia's throat, but she swallowed it down, reminding herself that this was her husband's mother, a woman she had tried for years to impress, to love, to win over, even when love was met with disdain. Tonight should have been different. Tonight should have softened old hurts and old distances. Yet instead, the air between them felt colder than it ever had, sharper, as though the older woman was watching a plan unfold exactly as she wanted. Amelia searched the room for Daniel, hoping his presence, his smile, his touch would anchor her. But when she finally found him standing near the bar, surrounded by a group of business associates, her breath caught for a completely different reason. He wasn't looking for her. He wasn't scanning the room with excitement or pride, ready to wrap an arm around her and pull her into the center of the celebration. Instead, he looked almost bored, detached, preoccupied. And when his eyes finally met hers, Instead of lighting up the way they used to in the early years of their marriage, they held an emptiness she couldn't read. He lifted his glass slightly, a gesture that might have passed as acknowledgement to someone who didn't know him, but Amelia knew him, and she recognized that the smile he forced onto his lips was nothing more than a gesture meant for the room, not for her. Still, she forced her shoulders back and approached him, determined not to let fear or the strange shift in atmosphere ruin what was meant to be a celebration of love. Guests greeted her, but each greeting held a strange hollowness, their voices too bright, their smiles too fragile, and every time she turned away, she could feel their eyes lingering far too long on her back. By the time the servers began bringing in trays of champagne flutes and soft spotlights dimmed for the cake-cutting ceremony, her breath had already become uneven, and her heartbeat felt like a series of soft collisions inside her chest. She tried to steady herself as she walked toward the towering cake, 6 tiers of golden frosting, orchids cascading down its side, and their initials intertwined at the top like a promise. But as she approached, the tension in the room tightened like a noose. Daniel joined her at the cake table, but even standing at her side, his body felt miles away. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't whisper anything sweet. He didn't even glance at her. His mother stood behind him with a glimmer in her eyes that made Amelia's stomach drop, and his brother hovered nearby with a strange stiffness in his posture that Amelia couldn't ignore anymore. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. And before she could gather the courage to ask what was happening, the master of ceremonies invited the couple to step forward and cut the cake, a moment that was supposed to symbolize unity, sweetness, and togetherness. Amelia lifted the silver cake knife, her fingers trembling slightly, but she forced a smile, determined to hold herself with grace, determined to believe that whatever odd energy filled the room would melt away once the first slice was made. But the moment the knife glinted under the chandelier's golden glow, Daniel's brother stepped forward as if pulled by an unseen force. He didn't smile. He didn't congratulate them. He simply slid a stiff, heavy envelope into Amelia's hand and stepped back with a coldness that froze the breath in her lungs. The room inhaled all at once. The orchestra faltered. The lights dimmed just a fraction too much, turning shadows harsher and emotions sharper. Amelia's heart hammered violently as she looked down, her fingers numb as she opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers that felt heavier than stone. Her vision blurred for a moment, her pulse roaring in her ears as the bold, unforgiving letters printed at the top of the page stared back at her with crushing finality. Petition for divorce. Her throat tightened painfully, the glamorous ballroom melting into a blur of stunned faces and glittering lights that suddenly felt too bright, too cruel. Guests gasped, hands flew to mouths, diamonds trembled on shocked necks, and Amelia felt the ground tilt beneath her heels. She looked up slowly, desperately searching Daniel's face for truth, for denial, for panic, for anything at all that might tell her this was a misunderstanding, a mistake, a nightmare she would soon wake from. But Daniel stood still, calm, almost relieved, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. His eyes didn't soften, his lips didn't part in explanation. He simply watched her break. Her breath shattered. The knife slipped from her hand and landed on the porcelain plate with a soft metallic echo that felt like a scream in the eerie silence. The room around her pulsed with shock, but all she could hear was the slow crumbling of everything she had built inside her heart over the last 5 years. The betrayal was sharp, cold, and deeply familiar, as though every sacrifice she had ever made, every tear she had ever swallowed, every moment she had ever chosen to love him harder, had been nothing more than a countdown to this public execution of her dignity. Her lips parted to speak, but her voice failed her. Her pulse roared. Her lungs burned with air she couldn't seem to pull in. She didn't recognize the world she was standing in anymore, didn't recognize the man beside her, didn't recognize the silence surrounding her. It was as if the evening she was meant to shine had suddenly been rewritten as her downfall. But before she could gather a single word, before she could demand an explanation or reclaim even a fragment of her stolen breath, a presence appeared behind her, steady and deliberate, slicing through the charged silence like a blade wrapped in velvet. A tall man, dressed in a black suit, stepped close enough that she felt the warmth of his breath near her ear. His voice was low and composed, yet chillingly certain. A voice that didn't belong to a guest or a family friend or anyone she had met tonight. "Ma'am," he whispered, his tone carrying a weight she didn't understand. "It's time to reveal who you really are." And in that electrifying instant, between betrayal, humiliation, and the unfamiliar certainty in a stranger's voice, Amelia realized the night wasn't ending. It was only beginning. Amelia's fingers trembled slightly as the weight of the divorce papers still pressed against her palm, yet her eyes sharpened into something cold and clear, like diamonds forged under fire. The world around her seemed to slow, the golden glow of the chandeliers softening into a distant halo, and in that moment, nothing else mattered except the clarity that had settled deep inside her heart. She would not break, she would not beg, and she would not let them see a fragment of the hurt that had been piling quietly for years. The room, which moments ago had buzzed with polite chatter, was now entirely still, all attention funneling toward her like a magnifying glass, heating every secret, every unspoken word, until they could no longer hide in the shadows. She placed the papers gently on the polished marble table, her fingers leaving delicate, indelible traces, and her voice, calm and measured, cut through the room like a bell tolling in silence. "You should have waited." The words barely whispered, yet they carried a gravity that seemed to shift the air, bending it around her as though unseen currents had begun to stir. Daniel's mother, standing in her emerald gown, full of jewels and haughty posture, laughed, a sharp, harsh sound that ricocheted off the high walls and painted the room with contempt. "Poor, useless wife," she sneered, her voice dripping with mockery, "wasting our son's future with your foolish dreams and empty heart." But Amelia did not flinch. She did not rise to the bait. There was no heat in her cheeks, no quiver in her lips, only a cold, unshakable poise that made the older woman falter slightly in her confidence, though she did not realize it. She had no idea that beneath Amelia's calm exterior roared a storm of power that had been quietly building for 5 years, power she had kept secret, protected and nurtured, unseen until this exact moment. Daniel's eyes, dark and unsteady, locked onto hers. He took a step closer, his tone deceptively soft, almost coaxing, but the words he chose were sharp as daggers, meant to wound rather than comfort. "Just sign, Amelia," he said, his voice low, almost intimate, yet cold enough to freeze her spine. "You were never enough." Each syllable landed with precision, calculated to strip her of dignity, to force her into submission, and for a split second, Amelia felt the familiar flicker of old pain, the years of trying, the silent sacrifices, the unrecognized devotion. But she forced it down, letting it settle into a simmering fuel rather than a roar. Around them, guests leaned forward, wide-eyed, expecting the graceful woman who had smiled at everyone tonight to collapse into tears, to raise her voice, to break apart before their very eyes. But Amelia did not. She simply let her gaze linger on Daniel for a heartbeat longer than expected, unwavering, unafraid, and then turned her attention slightly toward the crowd, letting every guest see the calm that came from knowing more than they ever could, a knowledge that rendered their whispers meaningless. Her posture was regal, her aura unshakable, as if the world itself bowed slightly to the quiet force that radiated from her. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure how to respond to a woman who, by all appearances, had just been handed betrayal yet refused to crumble. The orchestra, now hesitant, held a note that stretched far too long, the music trembling under the weight of the charged silence in the room. Just as Daniel's lips parted, ready to push further, to remind her of her supposed inferiority, a presence appeared at the edge of the table, a shadow moving with precision, dressed in the black suit that had already commanded attention in the previous chapter. The same man who had whispered the first words of promise and mystery stepped forward, calm, deliberate, and unyielding. He held a thick envelope in his hands, the kind of envelope that carried weight even before it was opened. On it, in bold, unmistakable letters, was written, "Confidential, Amelia's inheritance activation." The sight of it made Amelia's chest tighten, not with fear, but with a thrill of vindication, a pulse of long-suppressed power now stepping into the light. Daniel's eyes, once so composed, widened abruptly as he caught sight of the envelope. "What inheritance?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly despite his effort to remain calm, betraying his facade for the first time that evening. Amelia's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile, but she did not rush. She let the moment stretch, letting every pair of eyes in the room search her face, trying to read her, trying to guess the weight of the secret she had carried so silently for half a decade. The guests leaned forward instinctively, the tension so thick it could have been sliced with a knife, as though they could feel the shifting tide beneath their polished gowns and tailored suits. The air seemed to vibrate, humming with anticipation and shock, as if the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the revelation that would change everything in the room. Daniel's mother's smug expression faltered imperceptibly as she noticed Amelia's calm, controlled posture, the way she exuded quiet authority without even a hint of aggression. For the first time, the older woman's laughter lost some of its bite, replaced by a flicker of confusion she did not understand. She could not see the network of alliances and power Amelia had quietly woven, the empire she had built in silence while they all assumed she was nothing. She could not see the lawyers, the financial titans, the companies that had grown under her careful watch, while her husband flaunted wealth that was already crumbling, and that ignorance would be their undoing. Amelia's gaze shifted slowly, deliberately back to Daniel, and she allowed her eyes to hold his, letting him feel the weight of the truth without yet speaking it. Every heartbeat in the room seemed louder, every breath stretched thin with suspense, as though the walls themselves leaned closer to hear the unspoken promise of retribution and revelation. A few guests exchanged anxious glances, sensing the storm but unsure of its shape. Some murmured, low enough for Amelia to hear only if she chose, questions laced with disbelief and curiosity. Could it be true? What has she hidden? But she ignored them all, focused entirely on the man who had once vowed love and the family who had never truly accepted her. The envelope in the black-suited man's hand was handed toward her slowly, ceremoniously, as though it carried the weight of destiny itself. Amelia reached for it with grace, lifting it as though it were a fragile crystal artifact, and the crowd instinctively leaned in, holding their collective breath. Daniel moved to intercept, his hand brushing hers, but she did not flinch. She did not allow him even a glimpse of hesitation to seep into her posture. The moment her fingers closed around the envelope, the silence erupted into a dozen mini-shocks, a symphony of gasps and murmurs cascading through the crowd. Every guest realized all at once that the night was no longer a celebration. It had become a reckoning. Amelia carefully set the envelope down on the table beside the divorce papers, letting it rest in perfect balance, a symbol of the revelation yet to come. She looked at Daniel again, her voice calm but filled with steel, slicing cleanly through the tension like a blade honed to precision. "This is why you should have waited," she said, letting the words linger in the room long enough for their weight to press on everyone present. No tremor in her tone, no flicker of emotion beyond controlled intensity, just the quiet, undeniable assertion of power long hidden. The room seemed to shift slightly, the chandeliers reflecting 1,000 tiny sparks of light that almost felt like applause for her composure, for her strength, for the quiet devastation of the man who thought he could discard her. Daniel's hands clenched briefly at his sides, his jaw tightening, eyes flickering with a mixture of fear, disbelief, and a dawning realization that the woman he had underestimated for 5 years was not only unbroken, but fully prepared to reclaim everything he had assumed he could take from her. His mother's hand trembled subtly on her jeweled clutch, her previous certainty cracking just enough to expose a sliver of panic she could not yet disguise. Guests murmured softly, questioning, whispering, leaning forward on the edge of their seats, sensing that a dramatic pivot was occurring, a revelation that none of them had anticipated and that would shift the balance of power in the room irrevocably. Amelia lifted her head, letting her gaze sweep across the room, slow, deliberate, measuring, and letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Every whisper paused mid-air, every motion froze. The chandeliers flickered slightly, as though the room itself recognized the presence of power no one had foreseen. Amelia's calm authority radiated outward, creating invisible waves that caused everyone to feel the weight of history, decisions, and secrets converging at this singular moment. Even Daniel, his confident mask faltering, could not look away from the silent storm gathering in her eyes. And in that brief, electrifying moment, she realized she did not need to shout, cry, or plead. The world was already bending to the truth she had long nurtured in secret. The black-suited man gave her a subtle nod, a signal that the next step was hers, that the envelope contained not just papers, but the key to the power and recognition that had been hers all along. Amelia's fingers lingered over the thick, elegant paper, feeling the embossed lettering beneath her touch, the crisp authority of a document that had been waiting for the exact night the world had tried to humiliate her. And in that moment, Daniel, who had thought he held control, finally understood the depth of the miscalculation he had made. He had underestimated the woman standing before him. He had underestimated Amelia Grace Thompson, and the consequences of that mistake would be more devastating than he could possibly imagine. The tension hung like a living thing, vibrating in every polished surface, every whispered glance, every halted breath. Guests leaned forward, unable to resist the magnetism of the moment, as though drawn into the orbit of Amelia's silent but undeniable power. She was poised at the edge of revelation, and the world around her teetered on the brink, unsure whether to gasp in shock, applaud her composure, or recoil at the quiet ferocity emanating from her presence. And as her fingers finally curled around the envelope, feeling the promise of secrets and vindication, the room shivered collectively in anticipation, because no one present knew just how deeply Amelia had prepared for this night, or how far she was willing to go to claim what was rightfully hers, and the storm was only beginning to break. The envelope in Amelia's hand felt like a key turning in a lock that had been sealed for years, and when she finally allowed her fingers to slide over the crisp, heavy papers inside, the air seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Every guest in the room watched her with a mixture of fascination, confusion, and barely restrained fear. Daniel's mother straightened, her emerald gown gleaming under the chandeliers, yet there was a flicker in her eyes, subtle but undeniable, that betrayed the first hint of doubt. Daniel's carefully composed mask of confidence faltered ever so slightly as he noticed the way Amelia's posture had shifted, no longer timid, no longer pleading, but commanding attention without uttering a word. She was no longer the wife they had thought they could discard. She was something far more powerful, far more untouchable. Her voice, calm and measured, cut through the room like glass, resonating with the kind of authority that silenced every whispered speculation. "I own 3 tech companies," she said slowly, deliberately, letting each word settle into the marble air, as if she were engraving them on the walls themselves. I built them quietly for 5 years while you all mocked me, laughed at me, and assumed I would never amount to anything beyond being your daughter-in-law or your convenience." Each syllable dripped with the bitter sweetness of vindication, and even though her tone was steady, there was an underlying fire that made her audience recoil slightly. The words hung in the room like a storm cloud, thick with the weight of a lifetime of unseen labor, unseen strategy, and silent perseverance. Daniel froze in place, his hand twitching slightly as though it itched to touch her or stop her, yet he couldn't find the words fast enough to interrupt, to regain control, to salvage the facade of dominance he had so carefully maintained for years. His parents, who had spent decades cultivating arrogance and entitlement, now looked like actors frozen mid-performance, their disbelief sharp, their eyes wide with shock. They had assumed this night would humiliate Amelia, reduce her to tears, to submission, to silence, and instead, she had flipped the script entirely, standing in the center of the ballroom with every gaze locked on her, radiating a power they had never imagined. The cameras flashed, every phone lifted instinctively as guests captured the moment, their murmurs rising into a crescendo of excitement and disbelief. Social media notifications would explode in real time if anyone posted now, but for Amelia, the world beyond the room didn't matter. What mattered was the faces around her, faces of those who had tried to diminish her, belittle her, and erase her presence. Each flash of light was a symbol of her resilience, her triumph, her quiet but undeniable mastery over a life they had assumed they controlled. Daniel's hand shot out instinctively, grabbing hers with a sudden tenderness that felt rehearsed, staged, as if he believed that clinging to her in this moment could somehow rewrite the history of deception and neglect he had authored. "Amelia, we can fix this," he whispered, his voice soft, meant to appeal to memory, to sentiment, to love that she had already given away in good faith. But Amelia, who had learned the painful lessons of years spent loving a man who could not value her, stepped back with deliberate grace, allowing the space between them to become a barrier stronger than any steel wall. Her heart ached faintly at the sight of his sudden display of feigned guilt and affection, but it was nothing compared to the realization that she no longer needed him to validate her, to define her worth, or to determine her future. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the gasps, the stammered whispers, and the faces frozen in awe and disbelief. Even the servants, standing quietly at the edges, stiff with professional composure, could not conceal the shock rippling through the room. Guests who had once whispered insults now looked at her with a mixture of envy and admiration, incapable of tearing their eyes away from the transformation that had occurred before them in real time. Amelia's presence had evolved from quiet elegance to commanding authority in a single moment, and everyone could feel the weight of it pressing down like gravity itself. Daniel's mother, regaining a fragment of her composure, attempted a laugh, a brittle, forced sound that barely masked her panic. But Amelia noticed it, sharp and clear, slicing through the illusion of superiority that had held her mother-in-law together for years. It was the first crack, and Amelia could see it, savor it, but she did not gloat. Her satisfaction was quiet, internal, a fire smoldering beneath her calm exterior, for she understood that the real game had just begun and that outward displays were mere shadows of the power she now held. Amelia finally drew in a slow, controlled breath and continued, her words deliberate, each syllable a scalpel slicing through their assumptions and arrogance. "Tonight," she said, holding Daniel's gaze firmly, "you planned to discard me, to humiliate me, to prove your dominance over a life that you never truly understood. But the truth is, I am untouchable. What you see as my submission was actually my strategy, my patience, my careful preparation. For 5 years, I have built my world in silence, and tonight it awakens." The room, already tense, seemed to tighten further, every chandelier casting shadows sharper than before, as though the very architecture itself was holding its breath in anticipation of the coming storm. Daniel's hands twitched, the veins in his neck visible under the skin as he struggled to regain a semblance of composure. He opened his mouth, searching for words, searching for a lifeline to reclaim even a shred of authority, but the words failed him. The facade he had perfected over years cracked under the weight of Amelia's calm authority, her undeniable presence, and the revelation of a power he had never anticipated. His father, seated nearby, choked audibly, an involuntary gasp escaping him as he realized the gravity of the situation. The empire they had assumed they controlled through her marriage, through their perception of her compliance, was never theirs. It had always belonged to her. The envelope slid across the table under her fingers, its contents now visible to the crowd. Legal documents, financial statements, corporate papers, all illuminated the hidden network of Amelia's empire. 3 thriving tech companies, millions in assets quietly accumulated, a dormant inheritance worth billions, ready to be activated at her command. The guests whispered amongst themselves, unable to contain the waves of shock spreading through the room. Their cameras, now recording in feverish bursts, captured every reaction, every twitch, every falter of expression that betrayed the collapse of long-held assumptions. Daniel, desperate now, tried to impose himself physically, stepping closer, but Amelia did not flinch. She held her ground, her posture impeccable, her eyes calm, yet cutting. "You can no longer control me, Daniel," she said softly, the faintest edge of steel in her voice. "Everything you thought you knew about power, about loyalty, about who I am, was a lie you believed because you refused to look." The words settled in the air like a storm cloud, thick and unmovable, pressing down on every chest, forcing even the most composed guests to acknowledge the shift of power taking place before them. Just as Daniel opened his mouth to protest again, a hush descended over the room. A subtle movement near the grand doors drew everyone's attention, a presence that commanded notice without effort. A man stepped forward, tall, striking, radiating a calm authority that immediately shifted the dynamic in the room. His eyes, warm and brown, held a depth of recognition and admiration that went beyond polite courtesy. They held history, protection, and unspoken love. Every whisper ceased, every gaze turned instinctively toward him, and the tension escalated as if the room itself had sensed the arrival of an ally Amelia did not yet need to explain. He stopped at a distance that was deliberate, respectful, yet undeniably significant, and with a voice that carried effortlessly across the stunned silence, he said Amelia's name. "Amelia, your father wanted you to choose me, not him." The words struck the room with a clarity that felt like thunder, shattering illusions, rewriting every assumption, and forcing every eye, friend, foe, and spectator alike, to reevaluate everything they thought they knew. Daniel's hand fell uselessly to his side, his expression frozen in disbelief, as the very man Amelia's father had intended for her stepped into the light, standing resolutely where no one could ignore him. The ballroom seemed to tilt, to pulse, to shiver under the weight of revelation, and Amelia's heart raced, not from fear, not from uncertainty, but from the sudden, undeniable confirmation that her life was about to change in ways far beyond revenge or retribution. 4. The ballroom seemed to contract around them, as if the revelation of Amelia's hidden empire had warped the very air, turning polished marble floors into a stage for truths long buried, for history that demanded acknowledgement. Every guest, still recovering from the shock of the inheritance, now felt a subtle, undeniable pull toward the new presence in the room. Adrian Stone, the man who had once owned fragments of Amelia's heart in college, the one she had loved silently, without hesitation, without compromise, stood near the grand doors, a figure of calm confidence, a tall, handsome silhouette that exuded authority and warmth in equal measure. His tailored black suit, simple yet immaculate, framed a broad chest and shoulders that spoke of power, while the warmth of his brown eyes carried recognition, admiration, and an unspoken promise of protection. Even in the midst of chaos, Adrian radiated serenity, the kind that could anchor storms. Daniel's gaze snapped toward him immediately, his confident mask cracking under the weight of something far more potent than Amelia's sudden authority. "Who is this?" Daniel demanded, his voice louder than intended, betraying the first flicker of panic in his calculated composure. "Irrelevant!" he spat, gesturing toward Adrian with a dismissive wave, but even as he spoke, the room seemed to tilt subtly toward the newcomer. Every whisper, every glance, every subtle movement indicated that Adrian's presence shifted the balance of power in ways Daniel had never anticipated. The crowd instinctively leaned forward, straining to witness the unspoken tension, the collision of past love, present betrayal, and impending revelation. Adrian moved closer, measured, deliberate, each step exuding authority without arrogance. His eyes remained fixed on Amelia, a quiet devotion evident in the way his gaze softened, lingering on her as if seeing her for the first time in years and yet recalling every memory he had carefully stored. "Amelia," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying effortlessly across the room, commanding attention without raising volume. "Your father wanted you to choose me, not him." The words, though gentle, reverberated through the room like cannon fire, shattering the delicate tension that Daniel had relied upon to maintain control. Gasps erupted around them. Daniel's mother's hands flew to her face, her painted lips trembling, disbelief sharpening into anger. The smug control she had exerted moments ago began to crumble, revealing a glimpse of the desperation beneath. She opened her mouth, ready to accuse, ready to assert dominance, but even before she could speak, Adrian continued, stepping slightly closer, just enough to assert presence without overstepping boundaries. His aura commanded attention, and even the most audacious guests were quieted by the weight of the history he carried with Amelia. "Daniel," Adrian said slowly, deliberately, his voice dripping with calm authority, "I have watched over Amelia's companies for years, not for recognition, not for credit, not for anything she would see as interference. I respected her marriage, respected her choices, and protected her empire quietly from the shadows, because I always believed in her, because I always trusted her. Unlike you, I never doubted her loyalty, her intelligence, or her heart." Daniel's face shifted from confusion to anger and then to panic. He opened his mouth as if to retort, but the words dissolved into uncertainty. He had believed himself untouchable, the orchestrator of events, the puppeteer of marriages and alliances, yet here stood a man unafraid, a man untethered by lies, a man whose presence threatened to undo every assumption he had held for years. Daniel's mother, sensing a crack in their carefully curated reality, shrieked suddenly, loud and piercing, pointing a manicured finger at Amelia. "Cheating! You've been cheating! Her accusations dissolved in the stunned silence, because Adrian's next words cut sharper than any dagger. "She never looked at me once," Adrian said, his gaze unwavering, his tone calm, full of unshakable certainty. "Never once. She was loyal to a man who did not deserve her. Every choice she made, every sacrifice, every compromise, it was always for love, for the man she believed would cherish her. And yet, here we are. And yet, she stands unbroken." The words hung in the room like molten glass, sharp, impossible to ignore, and Amelia felt her heart soften, not for pity, not for comfort, but for recognition. Finally, someone had truly seen her. Not the wife they had thought she was, not the daughter-in-law they had tried to belittle, not the quiet, unassuming woman who had smiled politely while they plotted behind closed doors, but the real Amelia, strong, intelligent, determined, capable, and loyal. Someone had finally seen her. Tears threatened to rise unbidden, but she did not let them fall. She drew a slow, steadying breath, letting the calm confidence she had cultivated for years radiate from her every gesture, from the subtle lift of her chin, from the quiet steadiness of her gaze. The ballroom felt suspended in that moment, every chandelier flickering as if the air itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Daniel's hand twitched again, a subtle but noticeable motion of frustration and fear. He stepped toward her, trying to reclaim control, but Adrian's presence acted as an invisible barrier, a shield of calm authority that Daniel could not breach. Every step Daniel took was watched, calculated, measured, yet utterly ineffective. He could not compete with the years of silent preparation, the network of influence, the unspoken loyalty that Adrian represented, nor could he break the quiet power Amelia now wielded. Guests whispered, their murmurs a rising tide of anticipation, curiosity, and awe. Phones were raised instinctively, capturing every subtle exchange, every flicker of expression, every tiny movement that might reveal secrets beyond the room's grand walls. Cameras flashed, but the flashes were pale against the presence that Adrian carried effortlessly, the kind of presence that did not demand light to be recognized, that illuminated the room with sheer authority and history. Adrian's gaze remained locked on Amelia, and in the quiet of that connection, something unspoken passed between them. Years of unacknowledged affection, respect, and care, previously held at a distance to honor her marriage, now shimmered in the space between them. Amelia felt a warmth she had long suppressed, a sense of safety, a sense of recognition she had never received from Daniel, from his family, or from the world that had sought to diminish her. And yet, beneath the calm warmth, there was steel, an unyielding force that warned the room that this man would protect her at all costs. Daniel's mother, unable to bear the shift, let out another cry of outrage, her voice high-pitched, desperate, accusatory, but her words were cut short by Adrian's firm, steady tone. She never faltered, never wavered, she never looked at me, not once, not in longing, not in betrayal, not in doubt. Everything she has built, everything she has become, has been by her own hands, her own mind, her own heart, and she has done it with loyalty, respect, and courage you will never understand. The guests fell silent once more, caught between disbelief and admiration, unable to look away, unable to interrupt the flow of authority now dominating the room. Daniel's jaw tightened, his veins straining, but the words remained lodged in his throat, unable to reconstruct the narrative he had assumed controlled Amelia's life. The power had shifted irreversibly, and even he recognized it, though he could not admit it. Adrian leaned in slightly, the space between them charged with intimacy, but measured, careful, protective. His voice dropped, low and intimate, meant only for Amelia's ears, despite the room full of witnesses. "Your husband didn't file those papers to free himself," he whispered, the weight of his words vibrating with menace and truth. "Amelia, he filed them because he's hiding something terrifying." The words settled like a shadow over Amelia's heart, a chill that danced along her spine. The revelation hung there, invisible yet palpable. As the room collectively sensed the tension rising to another peak, the stakes escalating beyond mere inheritance, beyond betrayal, beyond recognition. The quiet storm had turned into a hurricane, and Amelia realized that the night, her life, and her very future were teetering on the edge of a revelation so vast it could unravel everything they thought they knew. The whispers returned, soft but insistent, as guests leaned closer, straining to hear, to understand, to glimpse the danger Adrian had hinted at, while Amelia's mind raced, calculating, bracing, preparing for the next blow in the drama that had been carefully orchestrated against her for years. And through it all, her gaze never left Adrian's, a lifeline in a world that had suddenly grown hostile, unpredictable, and impossibly complex, as if the threads of fate themselves had twisted in ways no one could anticipate. The moment Adrian's whispered warning settled into Amelia's mind, the room seemed to tilt slightly, the chandeliers above casting fractured reflections on the marble floors, mirroring the chaos she felt internally. Every eye in the ballroom was still fixed on her, yet a subtle tension began to ripple through the air, almost imperceptible but undeniably present. Daniel's once controlled expression had crumbled entirely. His knuckles were white as he clenched his fists, the careful composure he had so meticulously curated now in tatters. Adrian's calm presence only amplified the contrast, the serene authority in his posture, the quiet fire in his gaze, making Daniel's desperate panic more visible with every passing second. Amelia's thoughts raced, piecing together fragments of subtle clues she had ignored over the years, signs she had dismissed as coincidence or stress. The divorce papers, the timing, the sudden insistence from Daniel's mother, all now formed a coherent and horrifying picture. Daniel had not sought freedom from their marriage out of personal desire. He had sought to protect himself from exposure, from the consequences of the empire he had underestimated, from financial ruin that would leave him exposed and powerless. The weight of this realization pressed down on Amelia like a physical force, threatening to crush her. Yet she stood tall, her body trembling slightly, but her eyes sharp, focused, calculating her next move with the precision of a woman who had survived storms far greater than this moment. Adrian's voice, low and steady, cut through the tense silence surrounding them. "Amelia, Daniel's empire is crumbling. Every investment he claimed as secure is failing. Every partner withdrawing quietly. Every contract he relied on is dissolving. Your in-laws knew this. They planned to remove you from the equation before midnight because your wealth, once activated, cannot legally be touched by a divorced spouse. They wanted you gone, erased, silenced, before you could claim your rightful place in what you built for yourself. Everything you thought was normal, the coldness, the whispers, the veiled contempt, it was all orchestrated." Amelia's lips parted slightly, a faint tremor running across her skin as the enormity of Adrian's revelation sank into her consciousness. Her hands, previously calm, now clenched tightly at her sides, as if grasping for strength in the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Betrayal, anger, disbelief, and heartbreak collided in a tempest that had been quietly building for years, each piece of evidence now crystallizing into a devastating truth. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted with her heart, had been planning to discard her, not because he no longer loved her, but because he had been hiding from consequences he feared too much to confront. Daniel, sensing the shift in Amelia's demeanor, attempted to close the distance between them, stepping forward with a desperation that made his movements almost frantic. "Amelia, wait, please, just listen." His voice cracked, the veneer of control and arrogance slipping further with each word. He reached for her hand, a gesture meant to appeal to sentiment, to memory, to years of shared life, but Amelia pulled back instinctively, her eyes narrowing with a sharpness that made even the most audacious guests flinch. Her loyalty, once a bridge, now became an unbreakable boundary. She would no longer allow pity, manipulation, or false affection to dictate the course of her life. The ballroom's atmosphere became electric with tension. Guests who had been recording and whispering moments before now leaned in, eager to witness the confrontation, the unmasking, the reckoning. Every movement Amelia made, every flicker of her expression, was magnified under the glittering chandeliers. Daniel's mother, regaining her shrill composure, attempted to interject, her voice slicing through the room like a serrated knife. "Amelia, You don't understand. You've been—" But Adrian's gaze, piercing and unyielding, cut her off before a single word could take root. The calm authority in his posture reminded everyone present that this was no longer a personal dispute. It was a revelation, an unveiling of truth that no amount of wealth, pride, or manipulation could mask. Amelia, steadying herself, finally let her voice resonate through the ballroom, clear, commanding, and devoid of hesitation. "Daniel, you planned to discard me before midnight," she said, her eyes locked on him. "Because you feared what you could no longer control. You assumed that by presenting papers, by orchestrating whispers and mockery, by creating a stage where I would falter, I would willingly hand over everything I have worked for, everything I am, and everything I will become." Her words were deliberate, each syllable measured and precise, slicing through the tension like a scalpel. The room seemed to still further, as if the chandeliers themselves had paused to listen, as if the polished marble floors were holding their breath. Daniel's face drained of color, his jaw twitched, a nervous tic betraying the panic surging beneath his surface. He opened his mouth, perhaps to refute, perhaps to plead, but no sound emerged. The carefully constructed narrative he had relied upon for years was collapsing, and in its place rose the truth, a truth that Amelia now wielded as effortlessly as a blade in skilled hands. Tears pricked at Amelia's eyes, unbidden, uninvited, yet she refused to let them fall. They were not tears of weakness, not tears of sorrow. They were the quiet acknowledgement of a heart that had given everything, that had loved fully, that had sacrificed endlessly, and that had been met with betrayal masked in civility. She blinked rapidly, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, each inhale a reminder of the strength she had cultivated through years of endurance, each exhale a declaration that she would not be broken. Not now. Not ever. Daniel's attempt to grasp her hand again was more desperate this time, more urgent, but Amelia's pullback was absolute. She stepped aside, her body language firm, unyielding and yet fluid with grace, a demonstration of the power she now realized she had always possessed. "Do not touch me," she said softly, but with a sharpness that resonated through the room. "You have had your chance. You have squandered my trust, my love, my loyalty. And now everything you thought was yours to control has escaped your grasp forever." A ripple of murmurs spread through the guests, an undercurrent of fascination and disbelief. Phones captured every flicker of expression, every subtle interaction, every twitch of emotion that could tell a story far larger than the confines of the ballroom. Guests who had once whispered idle gossip now leaned in, sensing that history was being written before their very eyes. The subtle glint of diamonds on jewelry, the shimmer of silk gowns, the polished shine of shoes, all paled in comparison to the electric tension emanating from the center of the room, where Amelia and Daniel faced each other across a battlefield of unspoken truths. Adrian remained close, a constant presence, his hand just inches from Amelia's shoulder, an unspoken promise that he would shield her from any further attempt at manipulation. His gaze never wavered, alternating briefly between Daniel's unraveling expression and Amelia's steady, commanding stance. "She has given everything," Adrian murmured quietly, almost to himself, though Amelia caught every word. "Everything, and she has earned nothing but deceit and contempt in return. But now, the world will finally see her as she is." Amelia drew herself up, her spine straight, her chin raised. She swept her gaze over the assembled crowd, letting her presence command attention, letting every whispered doubt, every skeptical glance, every attempt at judgment be met with a quiet, undeniable authority. Then, with a voice strong enough to carry across the grand space, she spoke, loud, clear, and final. "Daniel, tell them who she is." Every head turned instinctively. A stunned hush fell over the room, heavier than the quiet that had preceded it. Daniel's face paled further, his mouth opening and closing as if to speak, yet no words could escape the horror that had taken root. And then, in the silence, a new figure emerged from the shadows, a young woman in a red dress, trembling slightly, yet carrying herself with a quiet dignity. Her hand rested gently on her stomach, the curve unmistakable, the undeniable evidence of life, of consequence, of a secret, long buried, finally stepping into the light. She was pregnant. The ballroom erupted in stunned whispers, the soft hum of shocked conversations rippling like waves through the crowd. Eyes darted between Daniel, Amelia, and the young woman in the red dress, searching for meaning, searching for confirmation, searching for the truth behind what had now become impossible to ignore. Daniel's lips parted, his hands trembling in panic and disbelief as he realized the web of lies and deceit he had spun was beginning to unravel before the entire assembly. Amelia's eyes narrowed, sharp as the edge of a blade, as the gravity of the moment settled fully upon her. The betrayal, the truth, the deceit, all converged into a single devastating clarity. And yet, she remained poised, calm, and unshakable, as if every moment of pain, every sacrifice, every heartbreak had prepared her for this exact confrontation. The young woman in red stepped forward slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying enough weight to make the entire room lean in. I don't even know him well, she admitted, her gaze flickering nervously toward Daniel, whose face had drained of color entirely. The shock in the room intensified, layering revelation upon revelation, each wave more destabilizing than the last. Amelia's chest tightened, her mind racing with the realization that the betrayal she had long feared was now manifest, yet her resolve remained absolute. 6. The silence that followed Amelia's command was heavy, almost suffocating. Every guest's gaze pivoted instinctively to the young woman in the red dress, whose trembling hands rested protectively over the swell of her abdomen. Sophie's face was pale, her lips quivering, eyes darting nervously across the room, trying to find safety in the sea of unfamiliar expressions. For a brief moment, the entire ballroom seemed suspended in time, as if the glittering chandeliers above, the polished marble floors beneath, and the ornate decorations surrounding them had collectively paused, holding their breath in anticipation of the revelation that was about to erupt. Daniel's mother, Martha, immediately lunged forward, her designer heels clicking sharply against the marble as she positioned herself defensively in front of her son. Her perfectly manicured hands shook ever so slightly, betraying a hint of fear beneath the practiced mask of authority. "Sophie, darling, you must be mistaken. Daniel would never—" she began, her voice breaking slightly under the pressure. But Sophie raised a shaky hand to stop her, the simple gesture freezing the woman mid-sentence. I don't even know him well," Sophie stammered, her voice soft yet carrying the weight of truth. The words spilled from her mouth like a torrent finally freed from a dam, shaking the room to its very foundation. "I barely met him. He promised me luxury, comfort, a life I never asked for, and he said I could rely on him, that he would marry me. But none of it was real. It was all a show." The confession, hesitant at first, grew stronger with every syllable, echoing through the room like a clap of thunder, leaving no guest able to avert their gaze or ignore the raw honesty radiating from her presence. Martha's face turned crimson, anger and panic warring in her expression, but before she could interrupt, Sophie pressed on, voice gaining steadiness from the surge of courage that had brought her to this moment. "And the baby?" She paused, glancing down at her stomach, as if speaking aloud, the reality of her situation made it somehow more terrifying. "The baby isn't his." The words fell like a hammer strike across the room, shocking even the most composed of guests. A collective gasp filled the ballroom, echoing from the high ceilings, ricocheting off the walls, and penetrating into every corner, leaving no one untouched by the revelation. Daniel's jaw slackened, his carefully maintained image of control shattered completely. The man who had so meticulously orchestrated every event, every encounter, every illusion of wealth and power was suddenly exposed, stripped bare before a room full of witnesses. His eyes flickered from Sophie to Amelia, the panic rising in chaotic waves across his features. For the first time in years, the mask of arrogance he had so carefully constructed failed him completely. The empire he had built on deceit, manipulation, and ego was crumbling in real time, collapsing under the weight of truth. Sophie's gaze shifted nervously toward Amelia, unsure if she would be judged, ridiculed, or dismissed, but when her eyes met Amelia's, she found not anger or mockery, but a quiet, unwavering strength. Amelia's eyes, dark and steady, gave Sophie the courage to continue, the signal that the truth would be heard and respected, not suppressed or ignored. He told me he would claim the baby as his own, Sophie admitted, her voice cracking slightly, so he could use me, so he could manipulate his image, so he could control everything he wanted without consequence. But it isn't his. None of it is. The room erupted in a symphony of murmurs, whispers, and shocked exclamations. Glasses clinked accidentally on side tables, champagne flutes rattled, and cameras once again flashed from the stunned guests who could not resist capturing the scene unfolding before them. The ballroom's opulence, its chandeliers, its gilded mirrors, its polished floors, suddenly felt hollow, irrelevant in comparison to the raw human drama playing out in its center. Daniel's mother's face contorted with disbelief, horror, and fury, a combination of emotions impossible to untangle at a glance. Daniel himself stumbled backward, as if physically struck by Sophie's words, and then dropped to his knees with an almost theatrical desperation, his hands raised pleadingly toward Amelia. "Amelia, please, don't leave me," he begged, voice raw, hoarse from panic. "You have to understand. I didn't mean for any of this. I can fix it, I can—" But the words faltered on his lips. He realized, perhaps too late, that Amelia's presence was no longer a sanctuary for his manipulation, no longer a safety net for his failures. Her strength now radiated like a force field, impervious to his feeble attempts at redemption. Amelia's heart beat rapidly, a strange mixture of sorrow and clarity coursing through her chest. The man she had once loved, the man to whom she had given her everything, was broken at her feet, pleading for forgiveness he had no right to request. And yet her tears, so many uncried tears of anguish and betrayal, threatened to fall, even as she held them back with a determination born from years of silent suffering. She wiped one stray tear from the corner of her eye, the motion deliberate and symbolic, as if to erase not only the tear, but the power he thought he held over her. "You didn't just lose me," Amelia whispered softly, the words almost drowned by the rising cacophony of gasps, murmurs, and shocked exclamations in the ballroom. "You awakened someone far stronger." The statement, calm yet pointed, sent a ripple of unease through the room. Guests leaned forward instinctively, sensing that Amelia's declaration was more than just an emotional retort. It was a warning, a signal that the woman they had underestimated for years was now stepping fully into the power she had cultivated silently, patiently, and unrelentingly. Adrian, ever steady at her side, placed a reassuring hand lightly on her back, guiding her gently but firmly as she turned toward him. His presence was an anchor in the storm, a calm in the hurricane, a reminder that she did not face this betrayal alone. His gaze met hers, soft, protective, and filled with a warmth that spoke louder than any words could. "Take me away from here," Amelia whispered, her voice both a surrender and a command, a choice to step into safety, into clarity, into the life she deserved beyond the ruins of deception surrounding her. The world outside the ballroom seemed to pause, as if even time itself recognized the weight of the moment. Daniel remained on his knees, desperation etched into every line of his face, yet he was powerless to change the course of events unfolding around him. His mother's face had turned a stormy shade of crimson, fingers clenching into fists, and the guests watched in stunned silence, their collective gaze alternating between Amelia's resolute composure, Sophie's trembling vulnerability, and Daniel's crumbling facade. As Adrian led Amelia through the crowd, subtle tension radiated in every step. Some guests parted instinctively, some stared openly, and some whispered hurriedly to each other, capturing every nuance, every flicker, every shift in power. The air felt charged, almost electric, as the whispers of betrayal, deceit, and revelation echoed in the opulent walls of the mansion. Every glance exchanged between onlookers hinted at the scandalous implications of the events, at the power of a woman who had silently endured, who had remained loyal, who had now reclaimed control over her life and her destiny with an unflinching gaze. Amelia's mind, though racing, remained clear. She thought of the years she had spent giving, of the sacrifices, of the blind trust she had offered to a man who never deserved it. She remembered every insult, every snide remark, every cold glance from the in-laws, every whisper that had sought to diminish her worth. And now, after years of enduring, after the storm had reached its apex, she realized with crystalline clarity that she had become something far more formidable than she had ever imagined. A woman untouchable, empowered, unstoppable, and finally free to chart her own path, far from the lies and manipulation that had once held her captive. The room behind them buzzed, a low hum of disbelief and curiosity, as guests digested the shocking truths that had just been laid bare. Daniel remained kneeling, utterly powerless, a cautionary tale of hubris and deceit brought to life, while Sophie, now visibly relieved but still shaken, allowed herself a small, tentative breath of liberation. The contrast was stark, dramatic, and undeniable, emphasizing the transformation that had begun in Amelia, the reclamation of her life and power, and the unshakable bond she now shared with Adrian, her anchor in a world that had once sought to betray her completely. As the doors of the ballroom opened and Adrian gently guided Amelia toward the waiting car, the whispered chaos of the room continued behind them. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, and eyes followed, but none of it mattered to Amelia. Her heart was steady, her resolve unshakable, her vision clear. The night of betrayal had passed, and from its ashes, a stronger, wiser, and more empowered Amelia emerged, ready to embrace the future on her own terms, far from those who had tried to diminish her, far from the lies that had once threatened to define her, and finally, side by side with someone who truly valued, respected, and loved her. 7. The night air hit Amelia as they stepped outside, crisp and electric, contrasting sharply with the tension and chaos she had just left behind. The grand entrance of the mansion, which had moments ago seemed opulent and imposing, now appeared to her as little more than a gilded cage, glittering walls that had hidden betrayal, manipulation, and deceit. She inhaled sharply, drawing the night into her lungs, letting it fill her with the clarity and sharp focus she had regained over the past tumultuous hours. Each breath felt like a claim on her life, her freedom, her power, a symbolic exhale of all the suffocating lies that had once defined her existence. Adrian moved beside her, a steady, unyielding presence, his tailored suit brushing softly against hers as he guided her toward the sleek black car waiting at the edge of the driveway. The car gleamed under the soft glow of the streetlights, reflecting a world that was ready to welcome her anew, a world where she could reclaim the agency she had been denied. Reporters swarmed the driveway, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward, their eager voices colliding into an overwhelming cacophony of questions. But Adrian, ever vigilant, stepped forward, his broad frame shielding her effortlessly from the prying eyes and intrusive words. His jacket draped over her shoulders, a protective barrier that felt simultaneously practical and intimate. "I won't let anyone hurt you again," Adrian whispered softly, close enough that his warm breath brushed her ear. The words, calm and unwavering, resonated deeper than any physical protection could. Amelia felt a shiver run down her spine, a combination of relief and vulnerability she had not allowed herself to experience in years. Her hands, still trembling slightly from the tension earlier, found solace in the warmth of his, in the gentle pressure of reassurance that spoke volumes without the need for further explanation. In that moment, the noise of the world, the flashbulbs, the whispers, the gossip, faded into a muted background, leaving only the two of them suspended in a cocoon of safety and shared understanding. The car door closed with a soft click, sealing the chaotic world outside, and Amelia allowed herself a moment she had not permitted in what felt like a lifetime. Her body, previously so taut with control, relaxed incrementally as the first tears she had held at bay streaked down her cheeks. They were not tears of sorrow or weakness, but of release, of recognition that she had survived, that she had endured, and that she had emerged stronger than ever. She leaned against Adrian, resting her head lightly on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, a rhythm that contrasted beautifully with the chaos she had just escaped. Adrian's hand moved to cradle her gently, supporting her as she allowed herself to surrender to the relief washing over her. "You're safe now," he murmured, his voice soft, protective, yet imbued with a strength that anchored her. "You've endured so much, Amelia, and you came through it with dignity, intelligence, and courage. Never doubt what you are capable of." The sincerity in his words wrapped around her like a warm, tangible blanket, and Amelia felt a sensation she had not known for years, a quiet, steady reassurance that she did not have to face the world's challenges alone. Her eyes met his in the reflection of the rearview mirror, and in them she saw admiration, respect, and something deeper, an affection that had been patient, unwavering, and constant, even when the world and circumstances had made it impossible to express. It was a stark contrast to the hollow gestures, empty promises, and manipulative words she had endured for years. Adrian's presence was more than a shield. It was a mirror reflecting the worth she had always possessed but had been denied recognition for. For a long moment, neither spoke. The quiet hum of the car engine filled the space, punctuated only by the soft tapping of her fingers against the seat. Amelia's mind raced, replaying the events of the night. The betrayal, the revelations, Sophie's trembling confession, Daniel's desperate pleas, the shocked murmurs of the guests, and the bitter satisfaction of reclaiming control. But beyond that, she began to notice something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, the gentle warmth of a connection that was not transactional, manipulative, or fraught with deceit. This warmth was patient, enduring, and profoundly grounding. Adrian's fingers brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, his touch feather-light yet intentional. The gesture carried a weight of meaning she could not immediately articulate, a recognition of her pain, her resilience, and the depth of her worth. "Amelia," he said quietly, his tone dropping even lower, intimate and deliberate. "You have given so much of yourself to people who could never see your value, to people who never deserved you. But I have always seen you, I have always respected you, and now I want to stand beside you, not in secret, not in silence, but openly, truly, completely." Her heart skipped involuntarily, the rhythm of her pulse quickening as her mind grappled with the words love, trust, vulnerability. All had been extinguished long ago, replaced with cautious endurance, guarded interactions, and walls she had built meticulously over years of disappointment. And yet, in that moment, standing beside Adrian, feeling the steady weight of his hand and the unwavering strength of his gaze, she realized that perhaps some connections endured beyond circumstance, that some feelings remained untouched even when the world tried to erase them. She turned slightly in her seat, tilting her head up toward him, her eyes searching his for intent, for honesty, for a sign that this was not another manipulation, another performance designed to control her. "Adrian, this... I don't know if I can..." Her voice faltered, the vulnerability evident, but her words trailed off into silence. Adrian's other hand came up to gently cup her cheek, his thumb brushing softly along the curve of her skin. The warmth of his touch, the patience in his gaze, and the unspoken promise in the firm yet tender pressure of his palm spoke louder than words ever could. "Amelia," he said, voice low and rich with emotion, "I know you're healing. I know the wounds are still fresh, and I will never rush you, never push you. But when you're ready, I want to love you openly. I want to love you completely. I want you to feel safe, cherished, and adored, not as a shadow, not as a secret, but as the incredible woman you are." Amelia blinked rapidly, the sudden intimacy and the promise of genuine love stirring emotions she had long thought buried. The tears that had begun earlier now felt like tiny sparks of hope, illuminating a path she hadn't dared to consider in years. A warmth spread through her chest, a slow, steady fire of possibility that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Could she trust again? Could she allow herself to feel deeply, without fear of betrayal? Could she believe that someone truly could see her for all that she was, and still love her fiercely and openly? The car moved slowly, gliding through the quiet streets. But Amelia felt suspended in a world far larger than the city around them. Her gaze softened as she allowed herself a rare moment of introspection, her mind tracing the edges of her heart, testing the boundaries of her resilience. And yet, every time her eyes met Adrian's, the warmth of his steady, patient presence reinforced the fragile hope blooming within her. Minutes passed, marked only by the rhythmic hum of the tires on asphalt and the occasional distant siren or chirp of a night bird. Amelia leaned fully into Adrian, her forehead resting lightly against his shoulder, feeling the security of his proximity, the rhythm of his heartbeat, the promise that he would never let her face the world's cruelty alone again. She finally allowed herself a sigh, deep and unburdening, letting go of the tension, the fear, the anger, and the heartbreak of the night, if only momentarily. Adrian shifted slightly, his hand never leaving her cheek, thumb brushing away the remaining tears she hadn't yet wiped. His eyes, warm and steady, locked with hers, conveying volumes of admiration, understanding, and unspoken affection. "Amelia," he whispered again, his voice resonating with sincerity, patience, and unshakable devotion. "You don't have to be strong with me. You don't have to hide your tears, your doubts, or your fears. I see you, truly, completely, and when you're ready, I will love you. And not just quietly, not just safely, but openly, proudly, and without hesitation." Amelia's lips parted slightly, a mixture of disbelief and hope warring across her expression. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, the combination of relief, trust, and the sudden prospect of love making her heart beat faster than it had in years. She felt simultaneously fragile and powerful, vulnerable yet safe, aware of the fragile line between past pain and potential joy. The car glided silently to a stop, but Amelia did not move immediately. She remained pressed gently against Adrian, letting the quiet intimacy of the moment anchor her, letting the promise of a second chance at love settle softly around her like a protective cloak. The night outside remained cold and distant, but inside the car, the warmth between them radiated like a beacon, a silent vow that the chapters of betrayal and heartache were behind her, and a new story, one of trust, respect, and genuine love, was only beginning. Adrian's thumb traced a slow, deliberate line along her jaw, and he whispered once more, almost against her lips, "Amelia, whenever you're ready, I'll be here, and this time, nothing will ever come between us." Amelia blinked slowly, letting the weight of his words sink in, her heart trembling with a mixture of excitement, apprehension, and the first fragile tendrils of hope she had allowed herself in years. She swallowed, her throat tight with emotion, and finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, yet resolute in its clarity. I think I'm ready." The soft smile that touched Adrian's lips was the first true smile she had seen from him in years, one that carried promise, devotion, and unwavering commitment. And as the car's interior bathed in the muted glow of dashboard lights, Amelia realized for the first time in a long time that she was no longer alone, no longer vulnerable, and no longer powerless. For the first time in years, she had the chance to embrace love, not as a secret, not as a luxury, but as a force strong enough to heal her heart completely. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting golden molten streaks across the horizon, painting the ocean in hues of amber, rose, and violet. Amelia stood at the edge of the balcony, the warm breeze teasing her hair and caressing her skin, carrying with it the faint, salty scent of the sea. Each gust felt like a gentle reminder that she was alive, that she had endured, that she had risen from the ashes of heartbreak and betrayal stronger than ever before. She breathed deeply, letting the air fill her lungs, feeling a sense of peace she had never thought possible. Months of turmoil, tension, and painstaking effort had led her to this moment, standing at the threshold of a life she had carved with her own hands, fueled by resilience, courage, and an unwavering belief in herself. Beside her, Adrian's presence was quiet but undeniably potent. His hand brushed against hers, fingers intertwining effortlessly, a physical testament to the bond they had nurtured patiently over time. He had been steadfast, gentle, and unwavering, allowing her the space to heal while never letting her face the world's dangers or her own insecurities alone. Every glance, every soft word, every protective gesture had reminded Amelia that trust could be rebuilt, that love could be patient yet passionate, and that the life she deserved was not a fantasy. It was tangible, within reach, and more beautiful than she had ever imagined. Amelia's gaze drifted over the ocean, watching the waves rise and fall with a rhythm both chaotic and hypnotically calming. Each crest and trough mirrored her own journey, the highs of triumph, the lows of heartbreak, and the steady pulse of endurance that had carried her forward. Her mind wandered briefly to Daniel, the man whose betrayal had once shattered her heart. She could almost feel the echoes of his desperation, the hollow echoes of his pleas, and yet she felt no anger anymore, not resentment, not bitterness, not even sorrow. What remained was clarity, a deep and unshakable understanding that his time had passed, that the love she had once given to him would find its true home elsewhere, with someone who saw her worth, cherished her entirely, and would never betray her. The evening was alive with subtle sounds, the gentle lap of the waves against the shore, the distant call of a seabird returning home, the soft rustle of leaves in the nearby palm trees. Amelia's heart, once weighed down by deceit and betrayal, now felt light, almost buoyant. She turned her gaze toward Adrian, and in that instant, the world around them seemed to blur, leaving only the two of them, suspended in a quiet, profound intimacy. Adrian's dark brown eyes, filled with warmth, patience, and a quiet reverence, locked with hers. No words were needed. They had shared unspoken moments over months, gestures, glances, and silences that spoke more than any speech ever could. "You don't need to be strong with me," Adrian said softly, his voice blending with the whispering sea breeze, carrying a weight that was both comforting and irresistible. Just be mine." The simplicity of the words struck Amelia in a way she had not anticipated. No manipulation, no expectation, no hidden agenda, just an invitation, a promise, a truth as steady and enduring as the ocean before them. Her chest swelled, a mixture of relief, hope, and a quiet exhilaration flooding her senses. For the first time in years, she realized she could relinquish control, allow herself vulnerability, and yet remain unshakably whole. Amelia's lips curved into a soft smile, tentative yet radiant, as warmth spread through her body like sunlight breaking through a long winter. She whispered almost reverently, "I choose you." The words were simple, yet they carried a lifetime of emotion. The pain she had endured, the courage she had found, the patience she had cultivated, and the hope she now dared to embrace. In response, Adrian's lips met hers, tender, deliberate, and filled with the promise of an unwavering devotion. The kiss was soft, almost ceremonial, sealing the unspoken commitment between them, a vow that this time love would be free of manipulation, betrayal, or deceit. As their lips parted slightly, hearts still intertwined in the shared rhythm of anticipation and affection, the world around them seemed to exhale, acknowledging the completion of a long, arduous journey. Months of struggle, revelations, and growth had led them to this exact moment, where love was not rushed or forced, but celebrated, embraced, and allowed to flourish in its own time. Amelia felt a surge of empowerment, the knowledge that she had reclaimed her life, her choices, and her heart entirely. In the distance, the mansion where her tumultuous past had unfolded stood silently against the setting sun, a symbol of the battles she had fought and won. Her charities flourished, her tech scholarships had begun to change countless lives, and her name had become synonymous with resilience, intelligence, and compassionate leadership. Each achievement was a testament to her strength, a mirror reflecting the woman she had become, unyielding, graceful, and unstoppable. Yet, in all her triumphs, Adrian had remained beside her, patient, constant, and loving, never forcing her heart, but guiding her gently toward a love she had thought unattainable. As the car that had brought them here pulled up quietly to the cliffside overlooking the ocean, Adrian held her hand firmly, letting her lead the way to the edge. They stood together, toes brushing against the soft, cool sand, waves whispering promises below, and the horizon ablaze with color. "I promise," Adrian said softly, voice full of certainty. "I will never let you face this world alone. I will always protect you, cherish you, and love you openly. Always." The words were a balm to her soul, a shield against all lingering fear, a declaration that she was safe, loved, and cherished beyond measure. Amelia looked at him, heart swelling, chest tightening with a mixture of awe and joy. She had dreamed of this moment, perhaps unconsciously, through the years of heartache and struggle, the moment when she could stand fully herself, empowered, unafraid, and yet entirely open to the love she had always deserved. And here he was, steady, unwavering, and patient, holding her hand and promising that her past pain would never shadow their future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows and bathing the ocean in molten gold, Amelia leaned against Adrian, resting her head lightly on his shoulder. She felt the depth of her journey, the distance she had traveled from betrayal to empowerment, from heartbreak to hope, from silence to being truly seen and cherished. In that quiet, intimate moment, every hardship, every tear, every moment of doubt and struggle seemed to converge into a single, beautiful truth. She had arrived at a place of genuine happiness, with a partner who valued her entirely, a life she had earned, and a love she had chosen consciously, courageously, and completely. Yet even as they shared that kiss and the waves whispered against the shore, a shadow lingered unnoticed. A figure Distant, yet deliberate, watched from afar, hidden among the dunes and shadows, their presence unnoticed by the couple but deliberate, calculated. Amelia remained blissfully unaware, lost in the moment, in the love she had found, in the triumph she had earned, and in the peace she had finally allowed herself to embrace. The figure's gaze was intent, eyes glinting in the fading light, and a quiet determination hinted at a return, a plan, a disturbance waiting to intrude upon the serenity that Amelia had so painstakingly built. As the first stars appeared in the indigo sky, reflecting the light of possibilities, Adrian held her hand tighter, and Amelia smiled softly, feeling the warmth of her own heart mirrored in his unwavering gaze. "I choose you," she whispered again, reaffirming not only the love they shared, but the life she had claimed for herself. And yet, in the distance, beyond the golden waves and the serenity of the sunset, the story whispered that the past, though distant, had not yet released its grip entirely. Someone, unexpected and determined, was watching, planning, and waiting for the precise moment to re-enter her life. The wind carried the faintest whisper of a threat, mingling with the sound of the waves, a reminder that life's battles never truly ended, and that love, though powerful, always existed alongside uncertainty, suspense, and the potential for new challenges. But in that moment, Amelia did not falter. She stood tall, hand in hand with the man who had proven himself worthy of her trust and devotion, letting the waves of peace, triumph, and undeniable love wash over her, and as their lips met gently once more, sealing the bond they had chosen freely and fearlessly, Amelia knew one truth. She had finally claimed the life, the love, and the respect she had always deserved, even if the horizon still held unseen shadows waiting to stir the next chapter of her story. Wow. What a journey! If this story left you shocked, inspired, or on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends. Comment below. What would you have done if you were in Amelia's shoes? And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications, because here at Beyond Color Stories, the next story is always bigger, deeper, and full of surprises. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in